Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 14.23 high elo top lane tier list. So for your content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There weren't a huge amount of changes this patch, mostly focused around readjusting Aurora, nothing down Tahm Kench's kind of more exotic build, as it had definitely been picking up in mid and low elo, nothing down Zac, as he was overperforming as a tank in the top lane, adjusting Smolder, nothing Skarner, and buffing up Rengar. There are some other things I want to talk about as I go along, but those are the main things. The D tier is going to consist of mainly the same champions. Your Trundles and your Yoriks punish bad macro are traditionally better in low and mid elo. Not something I'd ever really recommend for Masters Plus unless you're a one trick of the champion, but then it kind of changes the dynamic of these kind of picks. Just not something I'm really going to recommend at the moment. In Smolder's case, it wouldn't surprise me if over time he completely fades out of the top lane. It looks like with the changes they made to him, it made him kind of non-viable as a solo laner, which is what their intent was. They wanted to nerf down his wave clear, his freedom of just being able to play out these lanes without really being punishable. They buffed up his gold scaling, encouraging obviously more AD heavy builds, which were like with the AD ratio buffs he received, so like more gold scaling, better AD ratios, amping up those builds. We've seen some like hubris variations in the bot lane. I'm not so sure where they've quite landed. Obviously, like your more standard variations, like your essences and your Shojins still look to be the main way you want to play him down there. But in the solo lanes, he looks to be a lot less performant. Obviously, in previous patches, he was mainly played in top lane as a counter pick into Cassante. He could probably still function in that matchup, but nowhere near to the same extent as he was in the previous patch. It's just a pick I'd recommend dropping. He just doesn't have as much value as you'd want really from a top lane champion within your pool. Cho'Gath obviously is one of the tanks most punished by the fact that he's incredibly low elo skewed. He really struggles the higher up you go, outside of being like good in stat sticky situations where he does just do a lot of damage baseline for a tank. With like for the Emax though, you can like function with him into some of those melee matchups, Qmax obviously into some of your ranged matchups. Is he a pick I'd recommend playing at the moment? No, but there are some things you can do to kind of like enable him to be a bit stronger. Actually, I'll do the tank segment now. So as people have like progressively gone on, people have realized Unending Despair is a really, really good item. I've been saying this for a long time. Unending Despair is probably the best tank item in the game at the moment. If you can fit it into your build, you should really be looking at going it. The tank, which I'll mention in a second, Maokai, has really heavily adopted this build because of his player base. Now, I mean, he's just had an incredibly aggressive increase in player base in the top lane, and as people have done research into builds, they've gone and realized that, oh wait, this is a really good trio of items in his case, the Unending Despair, Thimble, Winter Spirits combo. Can this be accessible on all champions? Not really. Some don't really value spirits if they don't have any like baseline healing or shielding within their kit. Some don't really need Thimble Winter, whether they just don't have any sort of mana problems or they just don't have mana full stop. There are conditions which need to be met oftentimes, but Unending Despair as its own item is an incredibly strong spot at the moment. You should really build it if your tank can, and most of them can. And yeah, that should really enable tanks to be a lot more viable in the top lane, because obviously the higher up you go, tanks really do fade out outside of your Cassantes, for example, who still maintain viability through having a strong laning phase and mobility to really keep up with the current meta of the top lane. Tangent over. Swain remains within the D tier. Obviously, there have been some like discussions around Swain builds and variations, but he primarily thrives off playing into tank matchups. Tank matchups are weaker in the top lane anyway. Well, I mean, just weaker in the top lane at the moment. That combined with there being like a load of champions you can really play into tanks and like get a lot of success out, whether that's just having a free scaling lane or being able to just abuse them, not really allow them to play or function as the front line they would want to be. Swain benefits from that. Obviously, he wants to be able to play into those tank matchups, but does struggle, like, generalistically into those other ones. Blackfire Torch, Cosmic looks to be the main core build. We've seen some other variations, like Uriah Winter's approach. I can't remember the third item there, but there are some free item cores which can definitely function with this champion, make him a bit more viable here. Is he a pick I'm going to recommend at the moment? No, he does remain within my D tier. Maokai is going to jump up to my B tier. I will speak about him in a second. Tahm Kench remains in the C tier. Obviously, he is pretty bad in high elo. The main strength to Tahm Kench is people just don't play against him a lot and can be really caught out by how much damage this champion does, especially with like the APE tank hybrid builds you have going, whether that's like Heartsteel Riftmaker into like a Protobelt Rabadon or just a Unending Despair Spirit, like your tankier kind of variants. he's still able to abuse these items quite well, and it can definitely give him viability in high elo. Is he still like a... No, not really. He still definitely struggles, especially the higher and higher up you climb. You can play him in low master, mid master. Past that, you're really going to start struggling and get really heavily abused by people who just understand what the champion wants to do and really punish you with like no clear, when you have no real clear win con or no fallback pattern, which would obviously be his ult pattern. Like, you're just ulting out your carry so they can be unable to do what they want to do in fights, which is a fallback pattern. It's not going to be as consistent though. Kayle also does still struggle in high elo. Same goes for Nasus. Both these champions, obviously, relatively weak early game. In Kayle's case, she still has a really strong level 1. Like, people really can get caught up by that. And that is the edge a lot of people have on, like, who main Kayle have over, like, a general player base, is just not really understanding how to play against Kayle in those early levels. Obviously, translating that power later on can be quite difficult. Like, you're really going to struggle until you hit your level 16 spike with like your 3 item core, whether it's like your Nashers, your Rabadons, your Lich Banes, your Rylai's, stuff like that. There are loads of different variations Kayle can go, and even like some like AD variations, but she does struggle quite aggressively in high elo at the moment. Nasus also really does struggle outside of like specific matchups where you can really get a lot of wither value, or your E shred can be really valuable. Obviously, the fallback pattern of the E with like Arcane Comet or Aerie has been nerfed. He doesn't really have that accessible to him anymore, and that did hurt him as like a high elo pick. He does sit within the C tier at the moment, but he does spike mid game. So if you can get through that early game, then he can definitely be a really oppressive mid game option. I just have him a tier above like your Trundles and your Yoriks at the moment. Udyr took a huge hit when they nerfed his double R, and I believe his baseline R, and that like really hurt his level 1 kind of like kill potential or heavy chunk potential, which a lot of Udyr players would like. That would be how they function in lane. They would abuse their level 1 quite aggressively, make sure they had like control of the wave. You're going for like your free wave into 4th wave proxy, so you get like that early back. You can pick up like a tier or something. There are different ways you can play Udyr in the top lane, but he definitely struggles a lot more after his nerfs. Silas is a counter pick to Malphite primarily, but he can function into some of the other matchups. You're primarily just utilizing him as a flex pick. Quinn isn't really played that much anymore. She really does struggle against the current climate, combined with the fact that our items have been consistently nerfed. She just doesn't really have a place in the top lane at the moment. Probably slightly better in the mid lane, but even then, still just not a great pick in general. Sion. I think Sion could probably move up to the B tier. I'm going to leave him in the C tier at the moment because I need to do some more testing and just some more research into this champion. But I've played a couple games. I've been trying like some like unending despair with like some AD hybrid variants like your Steroxes, your Titanic Hydras, and they feel pretty comfortable. Like, you can do lots of damage to Sion. You have the health gain on his W, which means you just don't really need items like Heartsteel, and you can still function with items like Unending Despair. And you can even opt into things like Spirits later on, or just Canik Rookin if you want a more generic magic resist option. Overall, this champ, I think, is in a pretty good spot at the moment. I could definitely see him climbing up the tier list, especially like if you have a lot of games in Sion, you're very comfortable playing this champion. For the moment, though, I'm going to leave him as like a high C tier pick. Garen is definitely struggling a lot more. The Stridebreaker nerfs really did hit him quite heavily. I believe they also nerfed Phase Rush from melee champions as well at one point. Well, I mean, I said 1 point like 4 patches ago, I want to say, in 14.19, I believe they nerfed it. And he just hasn't really found his footing again since. Obviously, you can still function into some of your counter pick matchups, but the more like obvious, but previously obvious ones were like your Cassantes and Jaxes. I don't really know how the Cassante dynamic goes after the changes to Cassante, but Jax should still be favourable for Garen if you're comfortable in that one. If not, you're not really going to be playing Garen. He's more matchup dependent, or like a fallback option if you do play him. Mordekaiser has never really found his footing in high elo outside of like your tank matchups where he can be quite abusive in lane and really utilize like difficulty and magic resist pickups, whether that's like your rest of your comp's AD, and it really punishes the tank for trying to itemize into you. That is the main like go-to of Mordekaiser. Outside tank matchups, you just don't really see him. He really does get quite heavily kited by most of the top lane pool, or just overwhelmed and just doesn't have, it's too telegraphed in his ability to fight back. Set also struggles quite considerably in high elo, kind of akin to like a Mordekaiser. Most people kite him out. He falls off quite aggressively. Just not a pick I'd really recommend at the moment. Warwick, has more potential. Like, I'd have Warwick slightly above some of these other picks. He is pretty deceptive in how much damage he can output, but people understand that if you just don't really give him the advantages in laning phase, then he can be quite easy to shut down in those later team fights. He has good 1v1 and like damage potential, but in situations where you rely on him for like burst, he just doesn't do enough unless really ahead of the curve, and that can be quite a hard thing to really pilot around in team fights. Pantheon, outside of being like an incredibly abusive lane bully with certain like keystone options you can run into, he really does struggle at the moment. I know a lot of people really dislike Pantheon, especially the likes of Spear Shot. He's very proficient at the champion. There are some other ones. Early Bird is another one which comes to mind, like really good at piloting this champion on the EU West ladder. But the pick can work. Like, he does have really good base damage, and that can really like enable him to like function throughout the game. Would I recommend learning Pantheon in his current state? Probably not. I think he should be slightly stronger, but he's definitely there as an option still. Yasuo coming in as a counter pick into ranged champions, and just matchups where you can really abuse your mobility combined with the wind wall value. Varus, Vayne, still like pretty abusive ranged options, can really punish tank matchups. Into skirmishes and bruises, so you can definitely have a harder time. Vayne obviously does have the mobility and is a very good side laner. Varus, you end up wanting to facilitate him in team fights, utilizing like your on-hit variations. He just doesn't have the variety of builds he once upon a time did have. Like the tank builds and AP builds just don't really exist as much anymore. Corki is removed. I think that was just a spike in his play rate because obviously he got a bunch of buffs to him. Alawi is very unpopular in high-low and still very much does struggle. I'd have Alawi slightly lower down as well. Once again, kind of akin to Mordekaiser, your player into tank matchups, champions which really can't do much about dodging your E, and then you stat check them down. Into bruises and skirmishes, you're once again going to have similar issues. You're relatively telegraphed, you will get overwhelmed, and it'll be quite hard to pilot this champion. Heimerdinger is an underrated pick. He's just very unpopular, which makes it hard to like really rate him that highly. He does have great wave push, and that can really enable him to like have good control over objectives. His damage and burst is very high. There's a lot of things to praise about Heimerdinger, but then he also can be relatively squishy if behind. His damage can feel quite lackluster. He can hurt team compositions. There are some negatives to him as well, and really like prohibits me from wanting to put him higher. But he's definitely a functional pick here. Skarner got nerfed, doesn't really change his placement within the tier list. I think he's a niche top lane pick. He can function into specific matchups where you can get like priority on your E, and like you can shut people down the lane, but his abusiveness in lane, his mana issues just really like make him struggle a lot more compared to where he used to be. It'd be nice to see Skarner as a viable top laner. I think the champion can be put in a healthy spot without being like this oppressive W with Arcane Comet bot, or just Q spam with Arcane Comet, which is like the two variations we've had, obviously. Moving on to the B tier then, we have, well, I'm going to add Maokai here. Maokai has shot up in terms of his pick rate combined with his like correct itemization choices, which is great to see. I love Maokai. I think Maokai is a really good champion. He was just struggling a bit too much on the top lane, like the mana problems and like the itemization wasn't looking great beforehand. But yeah, unending the spur into AD matchups looks really good. Do I think he's great into AP matchups? Probably not at the moment, but you can still opt into just sitting on like a null magic, and then you're picking up like your tier, and you itemize the beginning of Unending Despair. Like, you have kind of routes you can go around and components you can buy, but he can definitely struggle a lot more in those situations. Is he the best tank in the top lane? No. He's more situational. Obviously, we saw him in Worlds being played into the Jax matchup. That looked fine as an option. It did lose both games, I'm pretty sure, so it's not something you can really like write home about, but there is definitely potential with this pick. So watch out for Maokai top, learn the builds, like learn the champion, and you should find results. Like, he is in a relatively okay spot at the moment. Azir is the other champion I'm adding back. I love top lane Azir. I love top lane Azir more than mid lane Azir. I think top lane Azir has been better than mid lane Azir for a long time. Some people just unwilling to play it. On a more serious note, this champion got the 5% AP ratio buff towards his W at all ranks. That is a lot of damage to give Azir. That is like, if you think about his W attack being an auto attack, if you gave a marksman scaling auto attack damage, like with like a 5% flat rate when you like have 100 AP, that's incredible. Like, Azir really, really benefits from this buff. So if you play Azir top, he's in a considerably better spot, could definitely rise up the tier list from being like in the B tier at the moment. Into matchups like Argot, for example, Azir, great pick. And some of those other melee matchups, he can also be really, really punishing. He does struggle a lot more into like your Fioras, which have like the gap closers and like consistent damage to like really like move on to you. But into those single dash champions, like your Argots, for example, he can really comfortably lane against those, outscale them, or just like be more of a nuisance in team fights, especially if you're very comfortable on the champion. So Azir looking a lot better. I'm gonna drop Mundo down. I think this champion's really like starting to struggle considerably more in high elo. There was a time where Mundo, like, or more recently, has been like a viable high elo top lane tank. He has received a couple of nerfs. They did nerf the Warmogs, which was actually like really helping him in this kind of environment. And I think it's just progressively dropped further down. And I would have him as like a high C tier option now. Wukong, I think, has been underrated for a bit. The W buff really did help him, and it actually enabled him to like max E second without like feeling quite bad about it, because obviously W max second was the way to go pre the buffs towards W. But yeah, he's definitely in a lot better of a spot. I'll mention Rammus here. Rammus would still be in my D tier, by the way. This is just like taking note of a champion which got buffed this patch. It would theoretically help top lane the most having QCD taken off, because top lane Rammus doesn't max Q, so 4 seconds just free until level 13 is very nice on that ability. Rammus still struggles though. Even in jungle, I don't think this pick is like suddenly like the way to go. It did help him, obviously helps his clear speed, but only for those early levels. Other than that, he's still a struggling champion, and the Brown Wall 4 mil nerfs did hurt him quite substantially, which is why he just isn't really played in the top lane at the moment. Galio, I love Galio top. He's one of my main picks, especially into like your AP matchups. Into AD matchups, he sucks. He really does struggle quite badly into them. You can go some other some different variants. Like I've tried your Sunfires, I've tried like a Barmies into Riftmaker variant, I've tried Roa variants. They just don't really find the same level of success. Like they can function, and he does, but he does struggle a lot more. That is the main thing. Like he can just be overwhelmed. They will just out damage you consistently in most fights. Like his burst is high. Like the main thing going for Cassante is his early game burst damage is very, very strong and can oftentimes be quite deceptive, and people just don't understand how to play against him. And into AP matchups, he scales really well, so there is definitely strength to him, which is why I have him within the B tier. But as a generalistic pick, you can't blind him. He just struggles too much into those AD matchups, unless there is some like shenanigans you're pulling with your mid laner maybe. Malphite is the other side, great into AD matchups, terrible into AP matchups. He really doesn't have a great time into like the AP pool, which can oftentimes just consistently chunk him down, really hurts his want to stack armor, and you just, for that reason you just can't really blind Malphite. There are some variations, like I've played like your Malignants Malphites, and albeit they give him more functionality in most games, and they can enable him to win them, especially if you're like single targeting like your enemy ADC and you're just looking to shut down the opposing carry. There is definitely value to that. He still struggles considerably in lane mode, and that definitely does punish him, but I think he's a good B tier tank in the top lane at the moment. Kled, primarily just played by one tricks, but he's still very functional here, primarily once again played as a counter pick into Aatrox. Cassiopeia, I had another one here. Actually, I was going to have it was Azir, but I was going to have Azir, Cassiopeia, Rise all around the same area, where they're great into relatively similar matchups, where they can kind of free scale without being too heavily harassed back, and they just get they get to do all the bullying. And they scale well, they have good wave clear, and they can be really valuable AP hyper carries in the top lane. Are they the kind of things you want to pick every game? No, you can't pick these champions every game, but they do have a lot of value in those games where you can pick them. Aurora probably sits higher than these picks as more like a generalistic option at the moment, but yeah, these three champions very good in their current states. Teemo, also a solid AP option. He has good wave clear. Obviously, you can shroom a wave, and that can be quite valuable. He is more matchup dependent, though. You want to play him into auto attackers. He can struggle a lot more into AP and some of the dive pool, especially if blind just loses value in specific matchups. He got jungle enough this patch, doesn't really affect him in the top lane outside of like poaching camps, which it does have an impact, but very, very minimal. Akali is also with my B tier. She's definitely been on the rise as a more recent as a top laner. She just the itemization has been doing a bit better for her, combined with some of the previous changes she received to her ultimate, combined with like Shroud receiving cooldown refund later on into the game. That does just help her when she's getting more levels in the top lane. She's not suddenly like a great top laner, but she is a great AP assassin which you can play in the top lane. There is really just that option there for you now. So yeah, it's pretty good. Argot, I love. I think this champion is in a great spot at the moment. I think he's really good into not like a decent chunk of the matchups. He's not blindable by any means. A lot of the range options will just harass him and just make it really hard for him to ever play. Like, you don't want to play Argot into range compositions. You want to bring him out as like a 3, 4, 5 kind of pick into like a lot of melees where you can really get a lot of value out of your short range DPS or your ability to like flip targets. That is where Argot's main value comes in. Play him as a counter pick and you should have a lot of fun, a lot of success. He's in a really good spot at the moment, especially with like your Cleaver, Shojin variants. And we've even seen a lot more. If you want to check out any Argot mains, I recommend checking out Quante. I had a Swain one, which I have just completely forgotten off the top of my head, but there is a Swain, like you should be able to just type in Swain tips and they'll probably come up as the first recommended. There are good content creators for most of the champions of the top lane who I really do recommend checking out. And if you just want fundamentals, then obviously Alois is there for you. Singed is a great disruptor. Very much only played by OTPs. Obviously, he very much pushes the idea of proxying to the max. You want to utilize the fact that he is a weak laning phase and good wave clear to kind of just, run by the tower, sit, CS up, get to your like level 9 first item breakpoints, and then look to cause disruption, chaos within the game, output as much DPS as you can, whilst even like peeling for your carries at times. Like, Singed can just have a lot of value, and he is in a pretty decent spot at the moment. But yeah, once again, mostly played by OTPs. Tryndamere. So I did a dive into Yuntal's Wild Arrows on Tryndamere for this patch. It looks to be fine as an option. Do I think you should take it over Ravenous? Probably not. You still want the sustain. You want to just you want to sustain through lanes and then out sustain the enemy opponent, siege their turret, and then just continuously do that on sides, repeat, rinse, repeat, and scale up, get your items, and just dive them whenever you have ultimate up. But he's very simplistic in how you want to play him. Oftentimes you're going to just be sat on side lanes. You don't want a team fight really with this champion, as that is where his biggest weaknesses come in. He has no hard CC, and that can definitely be quite a big vulnerability of this champion. He is in a pretty what term would I use? Unhealthy spot for the game at the moment, though. I think the playstyle of this champion could probably do with some changes, whether that's like the sustain he's receiving and the choices he has accessible to him, or whether it's just like the unhealthy nature of just 5 seconds of unlimited or being able to output unlimited damage. There's just a lot of unhealthy things going on with Tryndamere at the moment, but he's in an okay spot. It definitely sits as more like a B tier option. Vladimir also sits as like a beta option. Obviously, the go-to Vladimir players, Elite 500. You're looking at like your phase rush Shamanari builds. If you can have 1v9 potential on this champion as like an AP option. I'd have him once again similar to like your Ryze, your Aziz, Cassiopeia, as like mid laners who can function quite well in the top lane, and oftentimes can perform a bit better in the top lane, where they can more often than not free scale and then get to those item spikes which they want. So Ornn's an interesting one. I think he's in a relatively weak spot compared to where he's been in, which is funny because obviously Ornn's been strong for most of time. This champion provides free stats for your team, which is an incredibly valuable thing to have, but he struggles against a lot of the top lane champion pool at the moment. He is very hard to blind without just being slammed against like an anti-tank or a champion which will really punish you, outsiege you. And that is where he's going to struggle a lot more. His team fighting is still great. He still provides free stats. He's very tanky. There is value to Ornn. So I think he does maintain his spot within the B tier. But he's not the kind of champion you can just blind and get away with it at the moment. I'd say there are better options. The likes of I was going to say Shen, but even Shen has his weaknesses in terms of like, people understand that you can just be sieged against and take his tower and then snowball that gold lead into like being more valuable than Shen just ulting to a side lane. The other thing with Shen, actually I'll talk about Shen when I get to him. What other champions got here? Jace. I don't like Jace a huge amount. I think he's actually been struggling a lot more with his itemization, but he does perform a lot better in Elite when people understand the rotations and the damage this champion can output like early levels with the amount of accessible abilities he has. He can be quite oppressive. If you struggle with that, then yeah, you're just not really going to be playing Jace anyway. And he has a lot of polarizing matchups at the moment. Once again, a champion which can't really come in as a blind pick. And then oftentimes will get outvalued by counter picks, but yeah, it does have more value in high elo in his current state. Gangplank, I think, is in a pretty good spot at the moment. This champion got buffed more recently. They buffed his ECD and they buffed one other thing about the champion. I think they buffed his mana growth, maybe. And that really did help Gangplank quite a bit. It enables him to, like, obviously just chain out more damage. Utilizing the effectiveness of your passive and, like, barrel combos early on into the game is an incredibly, like, high skill thing. And that is the difference between a good Gangplank and a great Gangplank. Oftentimes, yeah, if you're very proficient at this champion, you're going to play him into most matchups. You're going to feel quite comfortable on the pick. Is he someone I'd recommend blinding? Once again, no. There are a lot of ranged champions which can be quite a nuisance if you're not able to consistently rotate your barrels, and that can oftentimes just come down to like a ping difference even. Gwen sits within my B tier. Primarily just going to come in as like a counter pick to tanks these days. Did get quite heavily nerfed, and that did hurt her, so she does drop down from like an S A tier pick to more like a B tier pick at the moment, but she's still great in those anti-tank scenarios as one of the best AP options you have accessible to you. Olaf, like more like an AD option, like also really great into champions reliant on their hard CC, can cut down the likes of Ornn, Argot, for example, and just a lot of the tank pool. This champion will make it very hard for them to play, as yeah, it nullifies ability to ever pressure him on side lanes, and that is where Olaf's like biggest strength come in. You just run side lanes, and if enemy has two champions which can't match you, you will win the game more often than not. Your biggest concern as Olaf is champions which can oftentimes fight back against you, will just have more like burst damage and just refuse to give you that opportunity to sustain fight them, which Olaf will just beat against most champions. And that can be a big weakness of the pick. You can even team fight with Olaf though. Like when you have like an enchanter on your team and you're just like really steroiding the Olaf, he can be quite oppressive in most team fight scenarios. So there's definitely value to a pick like Olaf at the moment. Volibear and Rumble wrap up the B tier picks. In Volibear's case, he's still running the obnoxious Roa Flickerblades variant, which can be quite valuable in terms of the amount of burst he has. The dive potential of his champion is still very oppressive. If he falls behind early though, he's still going to struggle, and that will be punished more for the average, like in average elo, which is that'll be punished more in high elo, which is why in the average elo tier list I have him as an S tier pick. In high elo, he drops to more like a B tier pick, but he can definitely have value here. You still see Volibears running around just beating the shit out of people, and it can be quite amusing, obviously, when he's like really snowballing and just taking over the game. He has great siege as well, with like some of the AP items he picks up combined with the attack speed. Rumble has seen better days. He is traditionally a high S, or I mean like an S or like a high A tier pick in high elo. He's probably in one of the weakest spots he's been in for a long time. He's really struggling for elite. Really struggling for average play, doing okay for elite. Like he's still an oppressive early like laner with like the AP damage he can output combined with the rotation of like the heat mechanic. He's also pretty skill expressive in that regard, and his ultimate is a great tool for controlling like team fights or like objectives. But yeah, he's definitely weaker, and he definitely sits as more like a B tier pick, which is considerably weaker to where he has been over the like last couple of patches. Well, not even last couple of patches, like the last 2-3 years, where he's been considerably a stronger option. Rengar jumps from the C tier to the B tier. I forgot to mention him. The buffs this patch were nice. I don't think they were as big as a lot of people perceive them to be, but top lane Rengar has always been a bit better than jungle Rengar for like just more accessibility. Jungle Rengar oftentimes is only played by OTPs. Not to say that top lane isn't, like top lane is almost all OTPs as well. But he tends to be easier to pilot into some of the matchups, and like isn't as egregiously reliant on snowballing, albeit still reliant on snowballing. I do think Rengar sits higher up in just high elo in general. Obviously, I mean, like he's the most elite skew pick in the game. This champion, sits higher up in the jungle tier list as well. Sits higher up in the top lane tier list. Goes from the C tier to the B tier. Do I think you need to really learn him at the moment? Probably not. It's just more of if you already played the champion and you're very comfortable on him, you can kind of go back to him and still, like once again, find results. The A tier then. So these are the picks which I would recommend as like staples in high elo. Zac kind of sits as a low A tier pick now. I think I overrated him as an S tier pick in the previous patch. I think I should have had him as an A tier pick. Whether I should actually just drop him down to the B tier now is up to debate. We haven't really seen a huge amount of how the nerfs have played out, but they are decent. Like, it hurts his ability to burst people down. And it hurts his like almost ranged harass, which was what they obviously quoted in the patch notes. And that does hurt him. It does move him down to like a low A tier tank. I think the other tank, I mean, he's more like in line with the other tanks, like your Poppies and your Shens. These champions do have their weaknesses. Poppy, obviously, very strong early game harass, has decent builds with like some of the like Barmy's items or your Cindered Sky variants and like your Winter's Approaches, your Unending Despairs, which is like my preference. I would recommend people go for Cindered Sky variant oftentimes, as that just does give her more rotational capability and more damage, which she really does play into quite aggressively. But yeah, utilizing Poppy as a counter pick is still very valuable. In Shen's case, he's still very good isolated 1v1. My pick into Ambessa at the moment is Shen, outside because like I'm not a huge fan of I'm not a big Renekton player. If I play more Renekton, I would pick Renekton. That's very common Ambessa ban at the moment. Like, Renekton really does dominate that matchup. But Shen is like a good tank option into her. She will beat you oftentimes in 1v1, but Ambessa's siege is pretty weak. And Shen does a lot of damage early. And you can catch Ambessa's out and oftentimes 1v1 them pre-level 6 when Ambessa gets access to that like lifesteal and armor pen. Shen, can function in that matchup. He's just generalistically a decent tank build at the moment, has good durability, his wave clear is his biggest weakness, and the fact that he has pretty poor siege is, definitely going to hurt the champion. But, the nerfs did drop him down from, like, the S tier to the A tier, in line with the other two tanks here. The four horsemen, we have Fiora, Riven, Aurelia, and Camille, all in the A tier. Well, actually, Riven, okay, so I know a lot of Riven mains. I think this champion is like really, really good at the moment. It is actually like one of the best high elo picks, which I'm beginning to see a bit more. Like, I think this champion could definitely be like arguably upgraded to the S tier, especially if you're very comfortable on it. Do I still think she has pretty clearly weak matchups? Yeah, I think she isn't going to be a champion you want to just default on, especially if you just don't have a lot of games on Riven. Like, she isn't someone you can just pick up and play. You have to be very proficient at this champion to make her function, snowball your advantages, and oftentimes like find those edges in lane. But she's definitely in a really good spot at the moment. So she sits slightly higher than the other three horsemen, who all are very strong in their own unique ways, whether that's like the side laning, the isolated pick potential, the ability to 1v2. They just provide a lot of value, generalistically, and they can, have really strong kits. Honestly, like, things like Fiora, for example, can be great in, like, polarizing matchups, and even the same for, like, your Aurelias and Camilles. Like, they're great in matchups where you can really dominate and just not allow any breathing room. The other champions here are Darius, who is still a very elite skewed pick at the moment. It's honestly unfortunate because I know a lot of people, like the more average player base, like Darius, and he is still very popular for like the average player, unlike some of the other picks here, which are a little less popular, mostly because they are known for their high skill caps. Darius is mostly elite skewed because of his very, very dominant laning phase, and how you have to execute it well to really get a lot of value out of this champion. Yone is also going to be on my A tier. Same goes for Aatrox and Renekton, who I like having just alongside each other. I think both these picks are great bruisers. And then Yone, the Yone matchup, which was like known for like Zeus playing it, was the Yone into the Aatrox matchup. If Aatrox is really popular, it should be worth learning Yone for that matchup. He can obviously win in a lot of other matchups, and he can be quite favourable into tag matchups, especially if you're picking up Bork and you know they're going to go the likes of Heartsteel. Yone can really benefit in those situations. In Aatrox's case, it's the Spear of Shojin Voltaic Cyclosaur build, which is really dominating at the moment. It can enable him to really snowball and really like push his leads to like the next level. Obviously, Aatrox, you're going to want to play more into tanks, and you can struggle into some of these more volatile matchups, but he's still a very valuable pick at the moment. Renekton, great point and click CC, can synergize really well with AP junglers. It's just the go-to bruiser top laner in a lot of situations, and rightfully so. He is a very good pick. Strong in the early game, strong in mid game, does fall off later on into the game, but can just act as a body oftentimes for your hyper carries. The S tier then is going to maintain similar champions. We have Jax, who is slightly weaker, sits as like a low S tier option now, but still very, very oppressive in his CC, the early game with the power of his E, combined with the side laning potential, the item spikes. He's still a very strong champion, and the R nerf did hurt him, but not to the extent that it really like drops him down the tier list. In the case of Kennen and Nab, they are really recommendable like ranged top laners at the moment. Na can kite out most of the top lane pool. The free base AD he received not too long ago really did help him. He has the two keystone options in Fleet and Grasp, and both can function really well in like specific matchups. Overall, yeah, the pick's just doing a lot better. He does have some matchups which you can really struggle into, especially if like they just have the tools to mitigate his harass and then output like a decent amount of damage, or just dive onto him. Obviously, well-known one is like Aurelia, for example, which can be really hard for Na to pilot well, especially if the Aurelia doesn't really give him the room to like push his lead early on when he has access to that ranged advantage over her. In Kennen's case, yeah, he's still a really good abuser in lane and can be really powerful in teamfight scenarios with our ultimate. It's just a lot of strength to Kennen at the moment. He kind of flies under the radar. So if you're looking for something which isn't Aurora and you like your AP ranged top laners, then Kennen is a good secondary option. Gragas is great into Jax. He's also just great as a neutralizer, good AP option in the top lane. Like your AP options are going to be your Gragas, your Kennen, and your Auroras as like your main three. And then oftentimes you'll have like a Gwen in your champion pool or a Rumble in your champion pool. Obviously you're probably not playing as much Rumble, but yeah, Gwen's still great into tanks. And then you'll have like maybe like a more niche one if that's like your AP pool. And yeah, Gragas, yeah, great neutralizer, great into a lot of matchups which are really reliant on like jumping onto you, and you can oftentimes just body slam them away and utilize your displacement to really dominate in most scenarios. Cassante, still the S tier tank, still the premier tank in top lane. Great laning phase at the moment, does fall off considerably more aggressively than he had done. Well, I mean, Cassante used to be a scaling pick. He's now an early game pick, which is obviously going to be really elite skewed for already an elite skewed champion. He's just very dominant in this kind of environment. You can opt into different keystones depending on what you want, whether you want even things like sudden impact and ultimate have been like gaining traction. That combined with like biscuits and boots, or biscuits cosmic insight, and even things like mana flow scorch. We've seen loads of different variations of Cassante get played. He's just a great tank at the moment, and like really does spike quite aggressively on like your 1, your 2 items. Your Iceborne spike into AD matchups, really powerful. Your Kaena can spike into AP matchups, really powerful. Ambessa is going to be in the S tier. She long-term is overpowered. The main problem with Ambessa at the moment, she does have hard matchups. The likes of Renekton will punish you with that point-and-click CC, and that prohibits her from being my S+ champion this patch, which, spoiler alert, is the same champion from last patch. But she's really oppressive with the amount of mobility she has. Her scaling's really good. She has a really powerful build, which is on the rise at the moment, which is the Voltaic Cycler Sword into Spirit Shogun variant. It just gives her considerably more damage than the Eclipse Rush variant of her. And yeah, she's in a great spot at the moment. Utilizes the Energize passive on it with the amount of mobility she has. Will it get adjusted? I wouldn't be surprised like down the line. But for the moment, yeah, she's in a great spot, a great S tier pick, especially if you put the games in. And Aurora, the champion. Well, I remember this conversation pretty vividly because I found it so funny. It's like they succeeded in making Aurora better in low elo, but she's just overpowered everywhere now. Like, it's really funny because I mean, Aurora has been really dominant in high elo for a while. Like, this champion has so much kiting power. She does so much damage. She has 2 different builds. Her ultimate's an incredibly powerful tool. Yeah, she kites out most laners. Her biggest weakness is oftentimes the fact that she can get overwhelmed, and like if she falls behind, she can definitely struggle a lot more. But even then, she can still utilize that ultimate really effectively, and that can be a really powerful tool. So she had been oppressive for high-low for a while. She was like clearly premier number 1 pick outside of like Cassante has been like your tankier option. Like a lot of high-elo top laners, their pool is Aurora, Cassante. It gives a lot of like it gives you AD option, AP option, tank option, which is like obviously what most people want, and like that makes very good top lane pool. But yeah, Aurora still really strong. It did to an extent. There was a level of elo skew to it. Like, it was very small. She is very strong at the moment, so you're still going to play her. She's still going to find the results which you would have had. You might look towards other builds now. I don't know if Liandry is the dominant variation to play with her, like with like your Grass Liandry. There are like different routes which we had seen previously, like your Electrocutes, your Summon Ares, and then playing up like your With the electric variation, it was like always that Luden's Companion Storm Surge build, which still looks to be pretty prominent as an option. But like even things like Malignance and Blackfire Torches, like rush options, look really good on her. So I definitely recommend trying around, seeing what you feel comfortable on. Obviously, the AP build really taking up at the moment is that Blackfire Cosmic kind of pairing, because you really like value the amount of CDR both these items give if you're running it alongside like a Sorks, for example. And yeah, she's still very dominant, still going to be your go-to AP. She'll probably get nerfed in 14.24, so you'll have to wait till then if you want to move off her as a ban. She's just going to be slightly different to play now, especially with that ult no longer locking people and the movement speed moved from the passive to the W. So those are my thoughts on the high-elo top lane tier list. You're still going to be playing like your Auroras, your Nars, your Kazantes, like I mentioned. And Bessa is a great champion to have, as she does a lot of AD damage and is a great mid to late game fighter. Her early game is still going to be her weakest point. Gragas is a great neutralizer. Kennen is kind of just a slight tier down from Aurora, but still a really good AP option. And then Jax is a really good pick into like those auto attackers where you can really utilize your Counter-Strike capability and the siege potential and your pick potential on this champion. These are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Go.